at the 5:26 when usually you could fall asleep or already going back home or something like that. So I really appreciate coming here and trying not to fall asleep and try to listen what I want to say. Okay, so I will try to have it as short as possible and as entertaining as possible. We'll see how it goes. And my name is Andrzej. I'm working on games. I'm building HTML5 games and do all the other crazy stuff with games like sending newsletter, organizing competition, organizing meetups, workshops, etc., etc. You could probably found something of my projects if you're into HTML5 game development. And if not, then I can recommend trying that out. So today I would like to tell you a short story about the, well, not that short, but okay, about the JS13K Games competition. It was started in 2012. The first winners were announced at the On Game Start conference, which only the oldest HTML5 game developers still remember. It was the same year when I started Enclave Games, where we are building HTML5 games. And today I would like to tell you about participating in game jams, what that can bring, what can you learn from that, using the example of the JS13K Games competition. And I can assure you that my lessons learned from making many HTML5 games feel very similar to those of the developers participating in this competition. So JS13K Games, anyone heard about it? Okay, someone, that's cool. HTML5 game development is still a niche. This is even more hardcore. You have a whole month to create a game in JavaScript, which have to be below 13 kilobytes. So it's pretty small. The small screenshots on the entries pages are bigger than the games themselves, which is pretty impressive. But there are people who actually participate in that. You can win some prizes. Surprisingly enough, if I talk with software creators, they are throwing licenses at me, which I can then give away to the winners, which is really, really cool. I'm also printing T-shirts and some gadgets, which are then shipped worldwide to all the participants for free. And you can earn fame and fortune participating in the competition among your developer friends. The cool thing somebody noticed is that limitations spawns creativity. So even though the competition has some limitation, it can be used to immediately start thinking about something specific. If a competition don't have a theme or don't have any requirements, you're thinking about every possible combinations you can think of, and with those limitations in mind, you can instantly start thinking about the prototype or whatever you want to build. The cool thing about the competition is that you have something in which you can participate, and you are enforced, of course, if you want to stick to the deadline and build something within a given time frame. And the cool thing, you can learn something new by making a game. And this competition is focusing on that because all the games that were created over the years, since 2012, which are roughly 800 games. All the games' source code is on GitHub, and those versions, because when you submit a game, you want to minify it, of course, but the requirement is that you have to also publish documented source code on GitHub. So basically, all the games you can play on the website, you can look into the source code and see how the games were created, which is really cool. I mentioned you have a whole month to create a game. It's different from the classical or standard game jams where you have 48 hours. So instead of like forgetting how to sleep and drinking too much coffee, you can actually set realistic deadlines. Like, well, the deadline is set, but you can actually have time to work on something. You don't have to forget about eating and sleeping. You can focus on planning properly. And even because the competition is happening between in the middle of vacations, you can go and you can go for a week or two skiing or whatever on the beach, drinking some good alcohol, and you can still get back and create something, because there were people who thought that 30 days is way too much, so they had like 3 or 4 days of actual coding, submitting something, and there were cases where people actually ended up in like top 10 games out of 200 or something like that, so you can still do that, but you don't have to. The interesting thing, because if you learn that there is the 13 kilobyte size limit, it's pretty limiting. I'm not even sure I would be able to create something interesting in 13 kilobytes, because it is a challenge. But most of the developers that were participating in the competition found out that the file size is not really a problem. It is more about thinking about a project that is small enough to create it properly, and most of the times people run out of time rather than out of space. So from that point of view, 13 kilobytes is a lot. If you don't focus on using tools, if you try to write something in pure JavaScript, you will realize that many things can be generated with JavaScript. You don't have to have beautiful graphics. You can generate a lot of stuff. For example, there are games which will have procedural content generation. So you can have your levels automatically generated with every new gameplay, and combined with generating also some graphic assets, or trying to paint them directly on canvas, you can end up with a pretty cool outcome. Even though the limit is 13 kilobytes, there are many tools that fit into that, because the limit is 13 kilobytes in a zip package. So basically everything you can zip into 13 kilobytes can be used. So there are many micro frameworks or tiny libraries that you can actually use. There is a special page with all the resources collected over the years, where you have the micro game engines and boilerplates, some sound and music generation. You can generate artwork and fonts. There are also, of course, tools for minification, etc., some tutorials specific to this type of games, and a bunch of postmortems of people who actually created something, and they are writing their what went, they're writing a blog post about what went good, what went bad, etc., which is really, really cool to read. And you can also learn from reading those stories. So for example, even though 13 kilobytes might feel like a tiny space, you can actually have the whole setup of a basic boilerplate with which you can start. And all that, having a library for some events, printing on canvas, etc., creating some graphics, sound and music, all that can be squeezed into 13 kilobytes, and there are still space to create something like actual game. So the thing about the competition is that if the space is limited, you will obviously won't be creating MMORPG, which is good. So you really have to think small, and if you come up with something, the best idea is to try to cut the features and throw them away until you have the core mechanic, something you can pretty easily create and work on that. Even though you have a whole month to create a game, many developers were like focusing on not the thing they were supposed to focus, like creating graphics or generating something, and they end up with the last day when the game was still not working. So it's really, really important to create a working prototype. Then you can try adding something new. If it won't work, you can roll back to the previous version. And something which was my problem for a few years, because I was always trying to create something that was perfect, in my opinion, or at least trying to reach that. And there is a story of me trying to build, or actually finishing a game, a simple HTML5 game in 4 years. And it's a story of all the things you shouldn't do. But still, I learned that the hard way. But the thing is, you want to create something that will work. And basically, that's it. I mean, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be finished. The cool thing is, many developers from previous years who were like winning first places or second or whatever were very high on the winners list, were admitting that the game they submitted weren't actually finished, or there were things they wanted to add but didn't have the time to do that, etc., etc. So even though from outside, if you look at the games, they are very good, or even almost perfect, the developers may be ashamed of how the source code look, or about the features they didn't implement, etc., etc. So it's important to not focus on the perfection too much. There were stories of devs who didn't submit anything, even though it was pretty good, or submitted on the last day because they were convinced by others that it's actually a good piece of software. The good thing about prototyping is that if you create something, you spend like a few hours on that, and it doesn't feel right, you can always scrap it, throw it to garbage, and start something new. Create something that will be totally different, and you can repeat it like 5 or 10 times until you are happy with what you've built, because you still have plenty of time. If you try to do that during 48-hour hackathon, it might not work. But if you have a whole month, it should be okay. The thing I also learned the hard way is that I suck at programming, even though I would like to be a good programmer. I mean, I'm good enough to create something and finish games, and they even work sometimes. But if you realize you're not perfect and you're not awesome, you try to plan accordingly. You won't leave most of the stuff on the last day, and the project you will be creating won't be MMORPG. And the cool thing is, if you know that there is a whole lot of things you have no idea about, it's really cool, really good to focus on that small spectrum you are good at. For example, I will never ever try to create a multiplayer game because I have absolutely no idea how backend work in terms of games. So I will definitely focus on small 2D games, absolutely no 3D, which are single player. There is a server category, of course, so if you're brave enough, you can try that. But if you know that you don't feel comfortable with, or you have no idea how to build server games, you can challenge yourself and try that in 30 days, but you don't have to. You can focus on something, try to build working prototype, finish the game, and for me and for many other developers, finishing a very small game is way more important than having a huge MMORPG project that you are working for the past 3 years, sitting in your basement, and something you can't show to anyone. With the game, even if it's very small, you can show that you can deliver. You can finish a project within a given time frame, and it works, more or less. So I think it's pretty important. So you definitely have to have a plan. It won't work without the plan. I mean, you can try and, well, maybe I will add this, or maybe I will create something else, or maybe blah, blah, blah. It's pretty important to, if you're gonna build a prototype and have some features and you already throw away most of them, you have to plan it accordingly, calculate that stuff will take more time than you expect it will take, like 2 or 3 times. Something eventually will happen over this month and it will take like a week of your life. It happens. So it's really important to have a plan. And if the plan is detailed enough, you can, even if you have like few free hours, you can still work on something, on one tiny task, finish it, and forget about the job and get back to it in a few days. If you build it in a way that after adding the feature, the prototype is still working, that's great. Because if it's not working, then you have a problem, because even though you will be adding more features, if it's not working, then you will have, with more features, you will have problem pinpointing where is the error. So definitely you have to keep it simple as possible, even though you have 30 days. If you focus on the project, it's not that big. You have to really plan it accordingly to build something within 30 days. And even though you can build something in 2 days, it's really good to throw all the features you can and leave them for later and focus on the smallest piece possible. And as I mentioned, if you can have your prototype working and every new piece of code, every new feature won't break the prototype, that's really cool. because you can always revert to that point where the game was working and try something else. It's not that you have to throw the stuff forever. If you think something would be interesting, you can always create version 2.0 with all the stuff, all the features you would add to the game after the competition is over, because the games that were winning some of the editions of the competition were demos, more or less. And they were still winning the competition because somebody had a really cool idea, and it was more or less showing first out of 20 levels or something like that. So it's not that the game have to be finished in terms of implementing everything around it, all the levels, etc. It can be a snippet of something, and if people will like it enough, you can always continue working on the post-competition version. The thing I have problems with is that you can't work on your project in the basement. It's a great way to motivate yourself if you share your progress with other developers. And surprisingly enough, there might be some smarter people that will point something out to you and tell you that, well, maybe this or that could be done better. And after like spending 2 weeks in the basement, you will actually notice that they are absolutely right, and the things you are working on, you needed the perspective to see something obvious, and they who don't work on the project directly have totally different perspective and can suggest something that will ease your work on, or add some cool features, or remove something that is unnecessary. So showing progress motivates you. So if somebody asks after a week of not posting anything, what's the progress, you have to say something. But if you post it regularly, you can have feedback, and you can already accumulate that feedback in the game. It's important to test everything. It's also part of getting feedback and exposing yourself and showing your project to the others. Because even if you think something works, somebody else who haven't seen your game at all may have different approach and will just break it, or will have no idea how to play the game. So it's pretty important to try and test all the possibilities, all the input, adjust UX and UI, etc. The thing about the deadline for many is the most important thing, because if they have a pet project, they can work on it indefinitely. I know a few developers who are like working on a single project which have to be perfect, and they are changing the technology every single month, and they rewrite it every single month. And even though you can learn a lot by doing that, and it could be a good approach, in terms of releasing a project, it's a terrible idea. I learned that instead of trying to rewrite a project, it was a part of the story of releasing a simple game in 4 years, because I was changing the tools like 5 times in that time. So instead of rewriting everything, because I learned a better way to do something, I'm trying to finish this game as soon as possible and try the new concept on the new game. It's really cool because the previous one is finished, and I can start from scratch with the new one. So I already have a game already finished. So having a deadline of 30 days is a miracle to those people, because they're like, okay, so I have only a few days left, so I have to finish something, I have to submit something, especially that for submitting anything you will get a free t-shirt, so it's also a motivator. It works pretty well, because with that pressure of time running out, it's easier to cut the features that are not working anyway, and you're actually submitting something, and then you can brag to your friends that you have finished 5 games already or something like that. The problem is nobody will do that for you. So if you want to do it, you just have to do it, focus on that, and finish what you started. But as I mentioned, if you have some problems with some features, you can always try to throw them away, move them to the version 2.0 or something like that. And if you have the time, if the game is cool, you can always work on that on the post-competition version. And if you have the time, it would be cool to try and add some juiciness, some polish to the game. Because the judges don't have much time to play all the games, so if you make a good first impression, if the game feels good, looks good, it will be a lot easier to get the attention for a longer span. Even if the game is more complicated, if you get the attention pretty quickly, somebody will be able to spend 1 or 5 minutes on the game by checking the first gameplay or first contact with the game in the first, I don't know, 5 seconds or something like that. Okay, so let's see some games. This year we had like 254 games, which is crazy because the previous year was 127, so it's exactly doubled. And from the games which were just in the last edition, 2017, you have the games when you can jump, shoot, and kill everything around. I can tell you that I have no idea, I have absolutely no talent of playing those games, so I suck at them, sorry. Anyway, it's not working. Come on. I can show you the source code later, if that's fine. I want to showcase the games because the games look way hotter than the source code. But all the source code of all the games showcased here can be looked up on GitHub, which is the source code is commented, so you can look it up. So this one is like jumping rabbit, collecting carrots, and trying not to die. But there are also games which are, for me, look very beautiful. And all that in 13 kilobytes. I suck. So this game in particular, it has the day-night cycle, which is really cool if you not die long enough, which probably will be a problem here. So imagine that the game have 13 kilobytes. So the screenshot of 200 pixels is bigger than the game itself. If nobody is looking, I will usually get like five times more the score or something like that. Seriously. I will record the video and show it. But you can also get games which are more like artistic visions of their authors. And for example, in this game, you have to snapshot a scene from a specific point of view. So for example, we have to snapshot this scene from this one. So we are like moving on the scene and trying to find that spot. It was close by accident. There are also tactical territory control games in which you are sending your troops, taking over enemy bases, and all that crazy stuff. And you're capturing enemy beacons, and you have to select your troops, of course. And the enemy is already far ahead. But for 13 kilobytes, it's really, really impressive. You also have games in which, for example, someone said that, well, I don't need graphics. I suck at creating graphic assets. So why not make a game with emojis? So everything you are seeing here are emojis. So there is a tree, apple, etc. The snake is a cube with eyes, and the tongue is the letter Y, sorry. And the cool thing is it have like 100 levels. And it also have the level generator. And with next levels, it's getting harder and harder. You can move the snake in full 3D, like up and stuff, and it's like crazy. The guy wrote a post-mortem, and it's like way too big for reading for normal people. If you have like a free week or something, you can read all that. It's like, oh my God, the images are still loading. It's like way too much information. It's crazy. Anyway, if you want to build something like that, it's really cool. All the source code is on GitHub, so you can check it out. And this guy took like second place. Anyway. So let's wrap it up. If I would like to remember 3 things out of this presentation, it will be first, KISS. Keep it simple. Try to squeeze your idea in a tiny prototype and throw all the stuff for later. The second would be KISS, and the third one will be also KISS. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Yep. The games are created with JavaScript. Sorry? Okay. So how the games are rated? We have a panel of judges, which have a judging panel. In the panel, the judges vote for specific aspects of the games, like the gameplay, etc., etc., and every single game gets a score with optional comment. But also, because there are so many games, and we have like 3 or 4 hardcore judges which actually played all the 250 games in like 2 weeks. But I'm trying to move the judging part to the participants. So there is a community awards. There are community awards in which developers themselves vote for the games. So there are a bunch of prizes you can win, and community awards are as important or even more important than votes from the judges. Any more questions? Yep. Yes, the story of last year, 2016, of the previous year. Two of the games, the two that took the first and the second place, the developers were working on the post-compo version, and they both released the games on Steam.